It's time for church, and it's time to ask those universal questions like I look at a problem and I ask why, or I look at a problem and I say, well, fuck it, let's jump into a rotation. I thought you might like that. We're here at 1714 East 7th Avenue in Ybor City, where it all began, down the street from Victor Licata's house, where he chopped up his parents just to make cannabis prohibition a thing here in the country. And we're still trying to work on it. But what the heck? We've been trying to do all sorts of stuff. We have some great guests. We have some great guests today. The best one coming first, always. But first off, let's identify ourselves for FCC rules. Oh, speaking of FCC, fuck you guys. Anyways, my name is Gary. I am the political director here at Suncoast Normal.
Turning down the...
And our master of public health from Johns Hopkins University. Thank you very much. Next, to my right, your left, is our deputy director, our master of business administration from, what was it? Kaiser, or was it Oaksterdam?
You know what? The wrong volume button. I'm turning Kano's volume down. It's Phoenix University.
Phoenix University.
Yeah.
Let's rise from the ashes and talk about our executive director up in the upper right hand corner, Christopher Kano, coming to you from above the Beltway, where he hits him below the Beltway, and deals with all the national federal crap that we have to deal with. And we'll get to that in just a moment. And just below that, from the West Coast, from West Washington University, and I'm trying to figure out why there's a difference between West Washington and East Washington, because it's so far off to the west, who cares? It's kind of like North and South Dakota. But for anybody who occasionally stops by Leafly, CBD Project, and that kind of stuff, this is how I enjoy my Saturday nights. I don't know what you guys do. But we have Dr. Joshua Kaplan, who's one of the foremost
I have the volume right on that one.
Authorities, and we're looking forward to hearing all the things that he's been working on. I talk with Sue Sisley from time to time, and she always tells me about the drama that is trying to do research in this zeitgeist, in this day and age. Do you serve that problem on your side?
Yeah, we certainly have it. I'll just mention, Gary, Washington is a big state. So we absolutely have a west and an east side of the state. And there are mountains in the middle, so you can split it easily anyway. But yeah, initially that was the problem. When I arrived here at Western Washington, now over
Washington, D.C., right?
Oh, the other, get out of here. Yeah, but the biggest problem I think we face is as researchers is getting our hands on anything that people actually use. Very rarely are people just solely using isolates. They're using whole plant extracts and that sort of thing, which just couldn't get in the lab. And so as a result, I think it was really limiting the type of research we could do, what we could draw away from it. So I actually wrote a letter to the Department of Justice saying that's somewhat BS, and we want our hands on some recreational products. And so they were at least able to give me access to any hemp-derived oils. So anything with a legal definition, being that it has less than 0.3% THC in it. But that allowed us to at least start studying the stuff that you could buy at the airport and bringing that into the lab. And so that actually... not only that I think has a lot more validity to the kind of research that we're doing, but it was cheaper. Cannabis is really expensive if you buy it from, DEA licensed sources, at least for laboratory purposes. I spent, when I arrived here, $2,000 to buy 1 gram of CBD, and that's just unsustainable. So that was the only legal CBD that I could bring into the lab at that time. So
was that Ukrainian isolate?
This was made in some lab, but that was the one that I was able to get at that point in time. And by being able to bring in hemp-derived cannabinoids, at least that made it a lot cheaper and a lot more sustainable for us.
Well, Doc, we know very well the the regulatory barriers to research and, of
Yeah.
course, the legislative barriers. But this is the first time we've actually heard of these financial barriers. I mean, that's ludicrous. $2,000 for a gram of CBD. The United States government are some of the worst drug dealers in the world. That's horrible.
Yeah, it was pretty astronomical and really limited what we could do. It was once we were able to get that.
It's
that
1 gram.
then we could buy, we can actually do some real studies without wasting all of our money on just buying isolate. So
now we have one of the two last of the people who were in the original federal program where people got access to cannabis for treatment. Last two are, of course, LV being one and Irv Rosenfeld being the other. And they get their 300 cannabis cigarettes in a medical canister over at Bascom Palmer Eye Institute once a month. And I've tasted that stuff, and I thought to myself, my God, this is almost as good as True Leaf. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It's not nearly as bad as True Leaf. But University of Mississippi, they're growing an expensive product that they freeze dried with all the rat droppings on the floor, and they send it to you for research. I mean, that to me is remarkable.
Well, yeah. So we don't get it specifically from the University of Mississippi. We decided to go a different route, and we've kind of taken a couple different approaches. We get some of the commercial products that are available, and we test those to understand kind of do different products have different efficacies? They do, not surprisingly, but that really hasn't been demonstrated much before. And then secondly, we kind of take a bottom up approach and say, okay, if these whole plant extracts have some efficacy that's better than others for treating different disorders, different conditions, then how can we optimize that by taking a bottom-up approach by systematically adding different components together? If we're saying that we think that, some CBD, maybe a little bit of THC, some cannabigerol, plus different terpenes, we can systematically add those together and say, okay, now what combination is the best for what we're looking at? And not just most efficacious, because that is part of the process, right? If we're thinking about treating some condition, we want it to be effective at reducing symptoms, but also how can we make it so that the dosing is such that it's accessible to more people? Because one of the challenges I think people face when they're using cannabis products, especially for the first time, is they don't know how much to use. And unlike other medications where you can just kind of escalate the amount that you're consuming if you're not getting symptom relief, think about Advil, right? Just take another Advil and maybe the pain goes away. But with cannabis, you can sometimes fall outside of that optimal dosing window on either end. Too little, not effective. Too much, also not effective. I mean, this is really the biggest problem with CBD, I think, at this point, is trying to find that optimal dose range. And so we're trying to find ways of expanding that so that on your first time, on your second time, you get that, you fall within that optimal dose range as opposed to dropping outside of it.
What do you think cannabinoid medication is going to end up looking like? Like, you go to the doctor, you get like some sort of blood test, and then this guy's like, the doctor's like, hey, you need sticky blueberry yum yum, or like, how is that going to work? Like,
yeah, I mean, it's a great point because we don't have a great way of putting in those specific components in any sort of controlled way at this time. So it's saying, hey, generally what is the most effective for you? And if we can identify different strains that have their unique compositions, then we can kind of target different disorders from there. And this has been well known, I think, anecdotally for a while, but just recently, maybe within the last 6 months to a year, are people starting to publish data on which strains are the most effective for different conditions, whether it's anxiety or pain or other things. And so we're just starting to scratch the surface of that. And that is really a main kind of focus of our lab's work at this time.
If ever you want a really educated answer to a question you may have, don't go to any of the people behind the counters at any of the dispensaries here in the state of Florida, because you will get that deer in the headlight look of like, I've been doing dabs up until the time I walked up to this counter and I don't even know why I'm here.
Yeah. I mean, that's the issue with bud tenders across the country, right? It's like they're not necessarily trained in providing that type of expertise in And so and a lot of their expertise comes from self-use, which is fine. I mean, that's informative to some degree, but it doesn't necessarily apply to everyone, especially folks who are maybe new to the product or new to the using cannabis and don't really know what to do or how much to take. And so they're getting information from someone who's a regular user where that same product is going to have a vastly different effect on them. And so I think you're right about that. We just don't have a good dissemination source yet for information about this and proper use.
And self-reporting is a bitch. And although a lot of folks want to be developing a medical program here in the state of Florida based on anecdotal evidence from somebody they heard on TV, possibly Fox News, and they come across these fantastic rules that we have over here, which says that you can't have any more than, what is it, 2.5 ounces maximum per 35 days, based on the scientific evidence that they drudged up somewhere, possibly Kevin Sabet, who is not our favorite person, who really doesn't have enough of a medical background but too much pharmaceutical influence to really have any kind of say in the matter. But they're the ones who are making the rules and regulations. And my daughter, who has chronic pain, she went beyond her month and had nothing to go on for the end of the month because I guess she doesn't fit their paradigm in regards to dosage is concerned. And wouldn't it be great if we had somebody who could help us out with dosage? But it's a tough subject when it comes to a biological. That's all there is to it.
Gary, I agree with you. My wife, she deals with chronic pain, especially from, ovarian issues and such. And I mean, we definitely go through more than 2.5 ounces in a month, but the fact is that up here in this area, you have access to it, especially with the adult use market spreading through the DMV now, with Virginia being legal, DC being legal, Maryland just made it legal. So the price points are right where you need them to be. I mean, you got to think, just the price of cannabis in Florida too is so prohibited. If you're thinking about what it would cost to buy 3 and 4 ounces from True Leaf or Curaleaf, in that state. Well,
I know Oregon had a solution for that: overproduction. Just produce so much that you have approximately 2 pounds per person, essentially being thrown out at the end of the month because it's already gone bad. Then you have a maximum amount of supply, but you still have a regulatory mechanism in the government who really is the bottleneck to all this, who really is deciding who should get what and when and where, and not researchers, not anybody who's done, like I said, the animal testing, the beta testing, the gamma testing. Those of us who understand those kind of things. Although I do have a quick question: how do you get a rabbit to sign a consent form? I have been trying to get that part down, but I offer cheese,
Yeah, you kind of coerce them with food, I guess, and get them to put the ink on their paws. I mean, you're right to note about like these different and the different state regulations are crazy. I mean, Oregon, you can grow your own. Washington, you can't, or at least Washington State, you can't. And it's driven the cost in Washington State up a ton for cannabis in the legal markets. And that's why I think somewhere around 60% of cannabis comes from the kind of illicit markets here in our state. And it's been really problematic for product developers and for retail shops out here because the regulations are such that it's pushing people more towards the illicit markets at this point.
Well, the chaos theory always says that, nature will find a way. And in this case, the nature of the market, I think, is what led to us having these hemp-derived cannabinoids, such as the Delta 8s and the Delta 10s and the THCO, THC acetate, and everything else that's popped up, due to the fact that they are limiting the legitimate product we're supposed to be utilizing for ourselves. Now, I'm not saying that Carlos sells illegitimate stuff. I think everything here is fantastic. He vets all of the manufacturers, which is good. Most manufacturers.
Yeah, I'm about to stop giving you free gummies.
Don't worry, I'll steal them. Anyways, but the point is that we need to have a source so that we can give people a continuous source of medication. I don't know anybody who changes their medication on a daily basis based on what they have at the pharmacy. But that is one of the other things that we're having to deal with. What is your concerns, or what's your beliefs in regards to these hemp-derived cannabinoids that are out there right now, especially those that are I'm not going to say synthesized, because that goes into another whole rabbit hole, but are being created through a reaction process and then put back into the flower and that kind of thing.
Are you referring to something like the Delta 8s there, or yeah?
I mean, we have.
Just,
I'm not going to mention who it is, but there is a dispensary here in Florida who is trying to get rid of all those things by saying that they're all synthetic, and therefore talking about K2 and spice and things of that sort, which we had to deal with at that one point in time, which we aren't dealing with now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the, at least from like, because I come at this very much from a medicinal standpoint. I mean, that's where a lot of the research in my lab does. That's kind of what I think about often, is kind of how this can be best be utilized for, for people in the long term, not just acute use, because I think there's a lot of benefit, or at least from what I've observed, for like acute use of cannabis in a variety of different conditions. I think the challenge is when you're talking about chronic use, chronic meaning more like prolonged, on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis to help symptom management. And in that case, I think the strategies need to be considered for how do we limit kind of tolerance to this. And if there are ways of limiting tolerance, I think we need that are still efficacious. We need to go down those routes because, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately, especially in the context of like the opioid epidemic and potentially cannabis's like opioid sparing effects. That is, can we reduce the need for opioids using cannabis-based approaches? And I think one of the limitations in that is coming up right now in that kind of that mechanism is when people are using kind of very high potent products, high levels of THC, or the synthetics that might have very strong effects. One of the things that leads to is tolerance. And as a result, the ability to use those products for a long period of time becomes weakened or lessened because they're just less efficacious, or because of the tolerance that develops. And so if there is a way of achieving those benefits by limiting tolerance, by kind of weakening some of the activational effects on the endocannabinoid system by which it's acting, then I do think that we can actually have kind of more effective long-term treatment approaches. And that's one of the things I'm really interested in kind of understanding at this point.
Doc, that's an interesting thing to bring up. How do you treat someone who has a chronic debilitating condition as they increase, more and more potent cannabis? Like, it's not like you can just take a tolerance break in the middle of a cancer treatment. So
Right.
that's a really good point and great research to try and figure out.
Well, what about situations like, does anybody know about like situations where people have CHS or cannabis hypermesis syndrome, where is it
otherwise known as eating too much neem oil?
Well, I am not going to say that it doesn't exist. I think it's highly widely misdiagnosed treatment, but I do think there's such a thing as CHS. Now, that being said, if somebody is in the middle of a cancer treatment and then all of a sudden they just have like explosive vomiting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they have too much THC in their system, their CB1 receptors are messed up in their stomach, right? How are we going to be able to effectively treat the cancer? You know what I mean? Like, how does that work? Does anybody even know? Like, has there been any research on this? Is CHS actually like fake?
and are they working on factors that would reduce the possibility of being acclimated sooner?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and one that people are talking a lot about. I mean, most of the reports on CHS I see coming out just saying like, we've documented these cases. Very few have really gotten into mechanism or what is underlying. It might be different things for different people. I mean, one of the kind of the earlier reports said, hey, just changing the strain or changing the product you're using can help overcome CHS, which suggests that it might have been a toxicity thing in the first place. When, especially in the unregulated markets, when you have, certain molds or other things that might be present in the flower that, hopefully would be regulated out, at least are tested out. In the state of Washington now, they have to test for certain type of pesticides or molds or other things. And so people might have been having adverse reactions to that, which is why when people change their product, some found relief from that. You know, as you know, Carlos, could be that there might be some desensitization that's occurring in the brain, but not in the stomach. And as a result, we're having this kind of reduced motility and vomiting. But what to do about that, I don't really have an answer. I mean, people have been looking at things like
Yeah.
desensitization creams,
Well,
like capsaicin and stuff like that. If you kind of, almost like a icy hot type of deal where you're overstimulating those pain receptors, which basically weaken them over time. They get tired, so you stop feeling that pain, and maybe that's the solution. But that's more of just like a Band-Aid. I don't know how to overcome that at this point.
I've even heard remedies where it's like, oh, you just need to take a cold shower.
Well, or a hot bath, and that's actually
there we go, the hot bath. Yeah.
But it works the exact same way as rubbing like a capsaicin cream on, which basically says, let's overactivate these pain carrying these neurons that are carrying pain information. Let's make them tired so that they stop carrying the pain information. So that's why icy hot works, and that's also why taking a hot bath can work for CHS.
Now, and that is for chronic situations. What we're dealing with right now here in this country is a massive opioid dependence ring that is basically killing a lot of people. And yet, what are they offering? They're offering Suboxone, naloxone, that kind of situation, which is a temporary fix at best. It doesn't really knock down the addictive process at all. It just puts you right back where you were before. And yet they're more than happy to spend as much as they want on Narcan to save your life today so you can kill yourself tomorrow kind of situation. You know, one more day to get one more fix kind of thing. It would be great to get some kind of solution. And yet every time I try to bring those kind of things up in regards to utilization of cannabis, which was used for what they called opium poisoning back in the 1880s, to reduce the amounts, to reduce the effects of withdrawal. Yet we aren't at the point where they're even willing to discuss that, because I guess the folks who create naloxone are more interested in pushing that as opposed to any alternative situation which might work better, and especially in the long term.
Well, Gary, I got to chime in there. I mean, they're not going to get any progress on that as long as cannabis use disorder still exists in the DSMV. You know, as long as we think people who utilize cannabis is a psychological disorder, this country has it ass backwards, and the science of psychology has it ass backwards.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was ever used to treat opioid use. But at the same time, it almost makes sense. I mean, that's where some of the research is going now with like CBD. There's some great research going on right now looking at CBD to help treat some of the symptoms of opioid use disorder, or at least reduce some of the negative consequences of like being in opioid withdrawal that in turn would lead to like cravings or relapse. And so I'm really excited about the directions those are going. Some of that work is being done right now by like Yasmin Hurd's group over at Mount Sinai. Just some really interesting work there to help people overcome that. But you're right. I mean, this is a massive problem. And I think at this point, we got to start thinking outside the box. I mean, you know, the National Institute of Drug Abuse is one of the largest, if not the largest, funding agencies in the world for treating addiction. And over the last several decades, it really hasn't gotten us any closer to helping us treat addiction. And so this is where we got to start thinking outside the box. And if cannabis is, you know, an effective strategy here, we got to start looking more into it. And there's just been there was a lot of excitement early on, especially when states started legalizing cannabis or giving legal access to like medicinal cannabis. There were like, you know, massive drops in opioid overdoses. There's like 25% in the states that legalized cannabis. But more recently, when they followed up those studies, that effect has seemed to go away. And the question is why? And we don't really know why, but it could come to, you know, a combination of a few things. One, within just the last, you know, 5-6 years or so, the escalation in harder opioids like the fentanyls and other synthetic opioids has just escalated like crazy. You know what? Back in 2017, I think only about 60% of the opioid deaths were due to fentanyl. Now it's 90%. So we're definitely seeing an escalation there. But also when you have an escalation in the kind of the THC potencies and other types of potencies that are coming up in the cannabis products that are currently available now, that is leading to more tolerance and what we call a desensitization of the receptors. And so if you are now kind of getting back to that idea of how do we manage chronic disease symptoms in some way, then limiting the tolerance is a really important component here. And that could be contributing to why the states that legalize cannabis initially see a reduction in opioid use and opioid overdose, but that effect goes away after about 6 months or so, which is kind of along the lines of tolerance development too.
And I've talked about Suboxone, and in the same light as methadone. When you have a product which is only semi-legal to be able to utilize to remediate a particular addiction, then that particular product also becomes part of the problem. I mean, there's been black market for methadone for years. I understand there's a huge black market right now for naloxone right now, and that doesn't help. That's when people can't get access to it quickly, and they want to get it done, and they don't want to be on a registry. They don't want to have to be arrested to get it, which also always helps, from what I understand. But the fact is, you need to have some access to the product, and yet we have people who are more than willing to reduce the amount of access that people have.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's hard enough getting it to rural areas, and where folks really need this as well. I mean, these clinics are often in big cities or big metropolitan areas where, yeah, sure, but there's very difficult cost and just energy barrier to getting the product yourself, especially if you live far away from these clinics. And so, right, having more opportunity, more options for folks is just so important, I think, in this overall crisis that we're dealing with here.
Doc, as a research scientist, I want to ask you this. One of the biggest public policy issues that we face right now is these arbitrary caps on percentages of THC. And I just, I worry that, like what you just said on this show, someone could just try and twist that into validating why we need caps on THC. What is your point of view on that? Are these caps good public policy, or are they not backed by science?
At this point, I can't say that they're backed or not backed on science. My concern, though, is that when somebody is trying to find relief from symptoms, and they have tried the kind of typical medications that are being prescribed by doctors, and they say, those aren't working, I need to think outside the box. I need to try cannabis because I've heard that it might work. And they go to a dispensary and they're told to get this, super potent high THC product. That's probably not their best option. Rarely is that their best, most, efficacious long-term solution for treating their symptoms. But for those who are more regular users who understand what they can tolerate and really know how cannabis works within their body, then they can escalate their THC dose in a safe and predictable manner. So I'm not necessarily for a cap at this point, but I think it's important for people to understand who are new to this, who haven't studied the science behind it, and to recognize that more is not always better. And I think maybe that's a conversation that, researchers should be having with physicians who are going to be on the front lines interacting with the patients who are saying, yeah, I'm thinking of using medicinal cannabis. The next question should be, what are you using? How much are you using? What is the potency? And trying to regulate it there, because a lot of the anecdotal reports of the benefits of cannabis are, they've been developed over the last 40, 50, even more years, which involve people using products and strains that had far lower THC levels than are available now. And so when people have that in their head that, it's, people have been seeking or getting benefits from this product since the 70s, and then they go to a rec shop and see a product that's got, 20, 24% THC in it. Well, that's very different than what the people were using and finding benefits from back in the 70s. So I think it's just kind of putting that in perspective and not saying that you should limit this to everyone. But when people are trying to use it for long term or new to the to cannabis, making sure that they're aware of those risks.
Now, you've done some research on this. What is the hope and the possibilities in regards to cannabinoids being used for opioid remediation, as opposed to the current pharmaceuticals that are out there? They have their own basket of side effects, especially when you have to continue to up the dose, because that's when the side effects start to appear.
Yeah. So one of the really interesting things I think from a cannabis and opioid co-use perspective is that there may be some opportunity of optimizing a treatment approach here for pain by utilizing both in a safe and effective way. Now, I'm not out here to say everyone should be using both at the same time, but we know a couple things from like a mechanistic perspective that I think are really interesting and exciting from a developmental standpoint for like developing a new pharmaceutical approach. And that is, one, we know that that opioids are as popular as they are because they work. I mean, that's it. They are arguably the most powerful pain medications we have. They obviously come with severe consequences, and everything from addiction to overdose, death, to major side effects, which just treating opioid side effects is a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical industry. So loads of harmful effects there, but they're effective pain treatment options. Similarly with cannabis, in the sense that the endocannabinoid system by which THC is acting upon is found in the same pain relieving spots in the body and in the brain as the opioid receptors are. And not only are they found in the same places, but they actually functionally interact with one another. So they share kind of the same intracellular processes that are used by just the endocannabinoid and the opioid systems themselves. It'd be like saying, hey, I've got two jobs. One job I make $50,000. The other job I make $20,000. Well, the combination of those two is that you make $70,000. And that's really what's important to you, not how you get there. So similarly with the opioid system and the cannabinoid system, the two are working together to basically provide that $50,000 and $20,000 boost to get, and it may even be synergistic in nature, not just additive. So making $50,000 in one and $20,000 in the other gives you not 70, but $100,000. And so there have been some really interesting studies and preclinical models, which basically show that the combination of THC, low amounts of THC, actually THC levels below the pain reducing threshold, in combination with things like morphine, which also below the pain relieving thresholds, together substantially improved pain. And so those types of studies, coupled to the fact that we know that these receptors are in shared spaces and use the same kind of intracellular machinery, I think is a very exciting direction for the kind of, well, at least the opioid reducing effects that cannabis can have, as well as a potential way of kind of targeting these systems for really profound pain relief. The problem, though, is, again, coming back to tolerance, that if you end up using so much THC that it reduces the number of those cannabinoid receptors, that can actually impair the opioid's ability to have its effects as well. And so there are conflicting reports in people where over prolonged periods of time, cannabis use with opioid use actually leads to an escalation in opioid need. And that could relate to the kind of tolerance that's developed. And so there's still a lot of work out there that I think needs to be done. But basically, if we start to think about this from a mechanistic standpoint, we can design, I think, better clinical trials for looking at this.
So it's kind of like an analogy to probiotics, basically, where if you find that the other object is trying to compete for food, so to speak, with the other things that you're putting in there, you could possibly remediate that and have one come up on top. Hopefully, the one that you want to be thriving, as opposed to the other one. Is that basically it?
Yeah, I guess we don't fully understand the total impact of removing one or the other, but it seems to be that both are important, because if you block those cannabinoid receptors, the effect of morphine decreases. So basically you would need more morphine. So the point there is that you don't want to mess with either of the system to the point that it screws it up. And that's just going to lead to an escalation either of the need to use even more cannabis or the need to use more opioids, depending on what you're doing there. So I think this comes back to like the need to be open with like your physician, the need to consider kind of what product you're using, the strength of that product, and remembering that more is not always better in this case.
So, Doc, one of the major public policy issues that we continue to have issues on is, conservative politicians always crying, "What about the children?" And we've seen that cannabis is effective for children with debilitating diseases. The use of cannabis in utero is now a hotbed topic because in some states they're trying to lock women up for child abuse. And we've seen long-term anecdotal studies that cannabis use in utero actually helps produce better outcomes for certain children. And women who have, intractable morning sickness, it's a way for them to actually be able to overcome their nausea, eat, have healthy pregnancies. So, is there anywhere in the country you're aware of that is doing, cannabis research in regards to pregnancy and women?
Yeah, I mean, there have been a number of these longitudinal studies that have come out in Canada, here in the United States. People are looking at this. It's hard because these are not well-controlled studies, right? There may be a variety of factors that lead people to use while pregnant, treating underlying symptoms, and it might be those underlying symptoms that those mothers are facing that could promote certain types of outcomes on their child just, to begin with. So it's not a very well-controlled study. We don't have a great understanding here. I mean, there's been so many conflicting reports. There have been some studies that show, the children end up having lower birth weights or they have behavioral problems later on. Others show, like you say, either no effect or even some beneficial effect. There's a well-known phenomenon known as the hermetic effect in pharmaceutical science, where basically a little bit of exposure to something that might kind of stress the system actually leads to better outcomes in the end. It's like, a little bit leads to these brain changes to deal with that promote kind of better success down the road. I'm not by any means saying that people should seek that out, but these are well-known phenomenon that occur. So at this point, we know a couple things. One, we know that the cannabinoids do cross the placenta. They do get into the developing fetus after birth. If the mother is using it while breastfeeding, we know that it can get into breast milk. The question is how much, and it varies so drastically, basically from nothing to over 10%. And so we don't know the factors that lead to that difference. And so there's really no predictive element that we can say, this is safe for you or this is not safe, because we just don't know how much is truly getting in. So when you look at these longitudinal studies and say some kids are unaffected, and in other studies they are affected, there's no control for how much exposure these kids had, underlying living factors. It's just a really hard thing to study. Knowing what we know about the developing brain and how tightly controlled everything is and how important these critical stages are during development, my belief is let's just try as much as possible to limit any sort of exposure to exogenous chemicals, and furthermore, just create as safe and happy as an environment for that child, that newborn, as possible. If that means reducing, the depression of the mother, from like a either depression or the anxiety they're experiencing or other types of harmful symptoms, then there is a cost benefit analysis that needs to be done. And we just do not know where to fall on that at this point.
Well, I'd be interested in seeing what the levels are of endocannabinoids in breast milk for those mothers who are utilizing cannabis as a phytocannabinoid, and for those who just come across the endocannabinoids naturally in a natural state within the breast milk. So for a lot of kids, they're going to get endocannabinoids whether they want to or not. Personally, I'm all in favor of breast milk. I put it in my coffee every morning, but No, not really. My pusher is out for a while, I think.
Yeah. I mean, endocannabinoids, sure. We know that those are really important in normal brain development. They're really powerful regulators of how brain circuits develop and all of that. It's really the kind of exogenous phytocannabinoids, which act just slightly differently on receptors and stick around a little bit longer and can have more kind of pronounced impacts. And they seem to have different effects at different times of development. I mean, we've been looking a lot at CBD in our lab, mainly because that has been really understudied. A lot of my research background back when I was doing my postdoctoral work was looking at cannabis, or really CBD use in epilepsy and epileptic conditions, as well as in autism spectrum disorder. And so kids are taking it, adolescents are taking it, and we have no real understanding of the long-term effects it has on the brain. And, we did a little bit of just kind of some developmental exposure studies looking at different developmental periods. And there do seem to be unique windows in which the CBD exposure is having long-lasting consequences, others in where it's not at all. So I think understanding where those windows are might be informative for the mothers who are considering using it for, like what you said about using it for helping to treat certain types of symptoms. And maybe they'd consider using it at a different period during either gestation or following birth, because we know that it doesn't have the same type of long-term consequences on the brain.
Well, we do a lot of work in politics here in the state of Florida, and we are trying to change the zeitgeist and the ideas they have in regards to the plant, so that we can get it in the hands of the right people who need it for access for particular things. And we're hoping that we can get together with you in the future, because I have tried more than once to have a presentation to our Attorney General to put together a program where they can create policy where this is at least an option, as opposed to just something out there. And I'm hoping that we can bring you back here to discuss that more, because there is so much to go. And we appreciate that you are continuing the work of Ed O'Shaughnessy, who, for those people who don't know, was a researcher back in the day over in India. And I think it was because of Queen Victoria had pretty heavy periods. He was trying to find some kind of animal research that would help her out. No, actually, it had to do with spastic diseases, I believe he called them. But we appreciate you continue being out there and fighting the good fight. But before you leave, I have to ask you a question that must be answered. Where's my titles flight?
Oh shit. Okay. There you go.
Okay. Now you're into running, is that correct?
Yes. You did some research too on me, huh?
Yeah, I do a lot of oppo. That's kind of the things that we do. And now I'm not going to ask you to go on your specific experiential situation, because God knows self-reporting has far too much bias. But when it comes to running, what makes you run faster? Being chased by the police or being chased by a plug that you didn't pay?
I always like to think that there's a bear on my tail. I live out near the woods, and so I'm always getting chased by the ghost of bears or cougars or something out here. But we'll keep you posted about the whole running and cannabis thing. We actually got a whole new line of research going on in our lab, looking at the kind of effects of cannabinoids on recovery and endurance performance. We got a couple cross-country runners here from the university who are interested in going and pursuing that direction. So
I would like to see the Z barrier come up during the first 50 yards. That to me would be wonderful. Make it a lot easier.
Yeah, well, it's exciting. I mean, the whole new that whole space is interesting too. The whole like endocannabinoid mediating the runner's high. So we're on board here. We're excited about that and the research that's come out in that direction.
All right. You can say bye. I feel like we have another guest coming on right now, and I think that Chris, you want to go ahead and do the introductions here.
Sure thing. Well, Dr. Kaplan, I just want to say thank you for joining us today. We're going to move on to our next guest, who is running for Tampa City Council District 6, which is West Tampa. Carlos, that's your side of town, and that's Mr. Hoyt Prindle. Hoyt, welcome to the rotation.
Good morning, guys. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, you might have caught a little bit of our previous discussion. We were, discussing with a scientist as to, the efficacy of cannabis, and really, here in Florida, we have a lot of issues with our medical marijuana system, and trying to debunk bad science and bad policy. And so, in 2015, the Tampa City Council adopted a decriminalization ordinance, which essentially gave folks a civil citation option, from the arresting officer rather than sending people to jail. What are your thoughts on that program, and would you, vote to, continue that as a member of the Tampa City Council?
Yes, absolutely. I think, obviously within the state and nationally, we need to move to a place where marijuana is fully legalized, even for recreational use. I think unfortunately there's still too many people that are caught up in the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s in terms of the thought process on that. But the public seems to be moving pretty quickly in that direction. And so my hope is eventually in this state, that's where we move to. And then we can stop having conversations about, people even being cited for, having marijuana on their possession. It's just really, something we need to move away from.
Well, that also rolls into this issue of, police accountability in our city. We have a civilian review board that's supposed to review cases of police misconduct, but the way the mayor has attempted time and time again to stall this board from gaining any real power and actually holding anyone to true account. What are your thoughts on police civilian review boards, and does Tampa's civilian review board need more teeth than what it currently has?
The Civilian Review Board serves a critical purpose in trying to, in my mind, assure that there is community buy-in and support in the way that our police are policing. And, ultimately that is what important. Police serve a critical function. We need police, but our police officers need to serve in a way that is respectful of the community and has community buy-in. And, ultimately, I think the Citizens Review Board, from what I've seen, is doing its job. And there are some, what's the right word? State law provides some, curbs that to the Citizens Review Board. So there's only so much that legally that it can do, but it does serve a critical function. And I would have voted with Mr. Vieira and others on council who would have at least allowed for a vote on the independent attorney for the Citizens Review Board.
Excellent. Well, Hoyt, tell us a little bit about your district, what side of town that you're running in, and really what motivated you to step up and run in this city council race.
Well, I'm sure as you guys see, Tampa's facing a lot of big challenges. In many ways, we're kind of becoming the tale of two cities. We have some exciting things going on Water Street and in Midtown that are these nice, expensive developments that provide a lot of tax revenue to the city and new things for residents to do. But at the same time, you can walk around parts of West Tampa or East Tampa, and there are no sidewalks, and there are streets without curbs and gutters, and there are flooding issues. And so ultimately, I ran for city council mainly because I saw a deficit in leadership to address the two biggest issues that I come across when I talk to residents, which is housing and transportation. District 6 is a pretty diverse district. You have very wealthy homeowners in the Beach Park side, which is on West Shore. You have the historical Latin community in West Tampa. You also have historical African American community in Lincoln Gardens and Carver City. And then the district goes into Small Heights, which tends to be more liberal and more progressive and has a lot more young professionals and newer families in there. So it's a very diverse district with some different needs, but ultimately the housing and transportation, when I go talk to voters, those are what folks are clamoring for. And so really, I jumped in and ran because I'm a lawyer and I used to be a commercial lender, and I'm used to being able to kind of bring people together and get things done. And I felt like we needed a little bit more of that on council for these two particular issues.
Now, I am hoping that our governor will allow us to continue calling those historically black neighborhoods, or just white neighborhoods where we let the black folks in later on because we wanted to.
Yeah, I don't know. We may not be able to say much of anything if current trends of the state continue the way they are.
Yeah, I mean, the governor recently came out in support of a bill to end nonpartisan city council elections like the one you're running in, where you'd actually have to run as a Democrat or Republican. And I just, I find that fixing the roads is not a blue or red issue. It's kind of silly to me. Carlos, you live on the west side of town. You got any questions for Hoyt, who wants to represent your side?
You know, not really at this time. It's more so just like I find myself extremely dissatisfied with the way things have been run so far, especially here in Ybor City. And
Well, let's have an
and,
airing of grievances.
and like
It's not Festivus yet.
Quite honestly, like as somebody who pays taxes in this district, like I say this quite often. It's like with the amount of taxes I pay in this with my business and personally, it really seems as though that like I could take that money and I could solve the homeless issue by starting a nonprofit here or something like that. And it just and I might be a little bit idealistic, I might be kind of dumb, but it really feels that like if I'm paying for all this fucking parking, if I'm fucking like paying all these taxes, if all these people that come through my store are paying taxes, all this bullshit, right? There's a strange amount of money that's being unutilized, right? When there's homeless people like overrunning 7th Avenue. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I want to actually ask you, Hoyt, like, like I could, go and speculate what the biggest misuse of money in the city of Tampa is all day, but I don't really know. Right. I'm wondering what you think, what this city is misutilizing right now the worst.
Well,
is that a good way to phrase that? I don't know.
well, I mean, my big focus is on infrastructure. And I'm somebody that didn't grow up in Tampa. I came here and fell in love with the place like many others. And so having, the benefit of living other places, including in Texas, I've often been surprised with how much Florida shortchanges its infrastructure. And, to me, when people can't even walk down the street because there's no sidewalk, I mean, we have a crisis of pedestrian fatalities in this city. It's one of the worst places to walk or ride a bike in the country, and that's just simply unacceptable.
Yeah, we had several pedestrian deaths just this last week, and bicycle deaths, and motorcycle deaths.
Well, right, and that goes back to how we plan infrastructure, how we design our roads, how we build our sidewalks, how we build bike lanes. Other parts of the country, I think, do it better than we do here in Tampa, and unfortunately, decisions that were made 50 and 60 years ago, where people were being, cheap or giving free giveaways to developers, has kind of put the city in the place where it is now, where unfortunately we're going to have to spend a little more money on infrastructure to get things up to speed. One of the things I talk about is there's something called the Sidewalk Trust Fund, which developers, when they build a property or build a house, have the option to either build the sidewalk that isn't there, or they can pay into the trust fund. So most pay into the trust fund because the trust fund charges $29 per linear foot to developers. And to build a mile of sidewalk, the current deficit that fund has with what developers are charged and what it costs is about $600,000. So that's going to be one of the areas in terms of where we talk about proper infrastructure and investment and making sure that developers as they make money in our community are contributing to it too. I'm going to look forward to adjust, and we'll have to look at impact fees and other things. But as you pointed out, it's just really unacceptable the amount of pedestrian deaths we have here, and it's not like the answers are not there. The answers are there. It's policy decisions and making safety of our residents a priority.
Well, it also helps to understand unintended consequences. I can't tell you how often I've felt that the local government here is very heavy-handed when it comes to eminent domain. They have no problem with taking people's homes and putting in an extra street that may or may not be needed and may or may not be completed in the next decade or so. Or they decide they're gonna move Tropicana Field and put it right in the middle of Ybor City, and no one will mind. Or they will go ahead and just pave over a historically black cemetery and forget about it until somebody says, "Hey, guess what? You ever see that movie Poltergeist? It's happening to you." That is what we're dealing with, and I want to know, what can we do to try to get a better balance when it comes to that?
Well, so I serve on the Transportation Planning Organization's Citizens Advisory Committee. And so the TPO board actually has quite a bit of control when it comes to local transportation projects. Transportation planning organizations were put in place by federal law about 50 years ago, essentially to curb some of the abuses of the 50s and 60s, that you point out, whether it be slum clearing, or tearing down homes without any local protection or recourse. Robert Moses in New York was notorious for this. Tearing out black neighborhoods, building bridges low so that buses couldn't drive under them. And so ultimately, the TPO board has to approve these local transportation projects that are done by the state. I've certainly had my issues with FDOT over the years. If anybody watches the CAC meetings, and to your point about eminent domain and the building at 1903 Lamar, which was a historic building, which people were looking to save, FDOT just tore it down, saying they couldn't afford the maintenance essentially. And so that's where I think I certainly will look to serve on the TPO board. But the TPO board provides a critical check and balance to abuses by the State Department of Transportation or others. And I think ultimately that's where we need to channel some energy in, to ensure that our local urban neighborhoods are properly protected.
I can almost guarantee that the money they put into a project that's going to be put in the place where Lamar was is going to cost a hell of a lot more than the maintenance on that particular property.
Well, it's going to lose tax revenue because it's just going to be an empty lot until FDOT decides to do something with it. That's one of the bigger challenges we have. We're one of the only cities in the country where the state is expanding a freeway in the middle of downtown. Other places are trying to remove freeways or limit the impact of freeways, cap them or bury them underground. And, we seem to be not learning from the lessons of the 50s and 60s and trying to widen a freeway in the middle of downtown where, these are some of the best neighborhoods in town. They produce some good tax revenue. So every time we do this expansion, it takes taxable revenue off the books. Which takes money away from the city, which takes money away from the county, and importantly, takes money away from our schools.
Now, I worked for the Centers for Disease Control for the better part of 2 decades, and one of my stations was in New Orleans. And I worked the Treme and I worked the Desire projects and things of that sort. And they had put a expressway back in the 1960s straight through the middle of the city in order to bring in more tourists for New Orleans. And yet they did not consider the impact of that neighborhood. And the impact is multi-generational. And I hope that we have more foresight than not to do the same thing that has been done in New Orleans and other cities like that.
We could go through a laundry list of cities across the country that have been harmed by, urban freeways. And even if you go back to the original interstate highway plan, the intention was not to have interstate highways through the middle of urban cities. That was more of a political decision, a different era for a variety of reasons, many of them racially motivated. And, we've kind of learned that doesn't work and that it harms our urban communities and reduces tax revenue and decreases quality of life in many ways. And so, I'd like to see the state especially start thinking about how we're going to plan transportation for the 21st century and kind of get out of the 20th century mindset of just adding more lanes, tearing out more homes, because it just doesn't work. I mean, it's scientifically proven.
Well, Hoyt, I wish you the best on that because it seems like the powers that be at the state level want to take us back to the 19th century because there's just so ass backwards these days in regards to actually coming up with solution-oriented things for our citizens, and they want to more engage in these people like to call them culture wars. But it's not a culture war. It's a dereliction of duty to focus on things that have no real results in people's lives. And everything from filing bills to you get a ticket for your dog sticking their head out of a car window, or the fact that there's certain books that kids can't read in school because, oh my God, there might be stories of discrimination. I mean, I read Jackie Robinson's biography as a kid, but you can't,
the band book.
But yeah, you can't read Roberto Clemente and Hank Aaron stories now, and it's ludicrous to see what's going on. But Hoyt, I want to give you the opportunity here to utilize this platform. Tell the folks why they should vote for you, why it's so important that folks get out in these city elections, which are on Tuesday. And so this essentially is the last day to early vote. Monday, tomorrow, folks will take a break, and then Tuesday's the day to hit the polls. So I'm going to give you the platform, man. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. And turnout, I don't know if you've looked, is historically low, even for a city election right now. It's I'd have to check the numbers today, but as yesterday, it was only 6%. So ironically, if for those who do vote in the city elections, your vote will have a massive impact. And you could see some races decided by 5 or 10 votes. So every vote counts. As Chris said, early voting ends today at 6 p.m. There are various places in District 6, typically the West Tampa Library and Jan Platten in South Tampa, the two easiest early voting locations. And ultimately, I'd like people to consider voting for me, and hopefully I ultimately earn their vote, because I do want to bring results-oriented leadership back to Tampa City Council. Obviously, it's politics, and so politicians, love to talk about things. But at the end of the day, we have to get things done. That's why folks should want to be in public service. It's why they should want to serve on city council. It's to improve the lives of the residents that we represent. And ultimately, we're at a critical turning point in our city's history where, if we don't start making some corrective changes very soon in terms of our housing and transportation policy, we're going to go the way of Los Angeles and New York and other big cities, where it becomes very difficult to unwind these policy decisions. I am somebody that, I try not to be a bomb thrower. I try to be collaborative and work with anybody I need to, whether I agree with them on every issue or not, because ultimately that's what the residents of this city deserve. And so, if folks decide to send me to Tampa City Council, I promise you that I'll spend 4 years rolling up my sleeves and working tirelessly to ensure we're making a dent to solve these issues.
And where can people get a hold of you if your platform has impressed folks today and they want to help out?
Hoytfortampa.com. That's HOYTFORTAMPA.com. I'm also easily found on Facebook, or you can even send me an email at hoyt.prindle@gmail.com.
Well, Hoyt, thank you for joining us today. Best of luck to you. We'll have hopefully some good news and good results in your favor come Tuesday. And we really appreciate you jumping into rotation with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So, Carlos, I believe it's time for the news, man. Why don't you go ahead and run that beautiful segment?
That was a great title, but who's the guy on the right?
Yeah, definitely not the guy with his hair, right? Well, look, when it comes to the news,
before you start your news segment, I just wanted to say congratulations.
Oh yeah,
because Suncoast Normal has gone national now. Let's put the graphic up here. Look at that good-looking guy from that graphic. Chris Cano is now officially a board member of National Normal. So everybody, let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. I'm quite honored. There were only 3 slots available on the national board. We have actually 2 people from Florida on the national board now, myself and Nikki Freed. So, shout out to Nikki for joining the National Normal Board as well. Look forward to working with her in helping to move the policy along. Also, congrats to Nikki for becoming chairwoman of the Florida Democratic Party. There is a lot of work to do to fix things in this state and to overcome a lot of the bad policies that folks across the aisle are putting forward. But I will say this, when it comes to news, some great news for folks that they should be aware of. The Justice Department website has opened the portal for those seeking a presidential pardon. It's been months. Normal has criticized the Biden administration for the delays, but the truth is that now an estimated 20,000 people are eligible and may apply to receive the presidential pardon certificate. Carlos, if you'll drop that link there, it's across the screen, and then Carlos, if you drop it in the chat for folks, they can click on it. If you are someone who this applies for, by all means, please apply to get your presidential pardon for your cannabis charges.
You can also scan that QR code on the top left corner.
Oh, see, look, 21st century. Scan that QR code for the pardon application. That is fantastic. Use your cell phone, hold it up to the screen, and get access and do what you need to do.
That's a QR code. I thought that was Chris's thumbprint.
That's funny. Well,
put your phone next to it, guys.
When it comes to also news and cannabis policy, I like to talk a lot about recent studies and talk about the science. And a study coming out of London in the United Kingdom, published in the expert review of neurotherapeutics, shows that cannabis products are associated with symptomatic improvements in pain patients with or without comorbid anxiety, according to some observational trial data. And so, if you have chronic pain and you have anxiety, cannabis it seems to be effective in its use, which for those of you who are already using it, already know that. But again, there's always science out there that comes out, a lot of bonk science. As today with our our first guest that we had on, it's important to know that the research is still out there, a lot of anecdotal research, but the truth is that everything is pointing that cannabis is effective. A new one actually coming out of Ottawa, Canada, and published in the Journal of Otolaryngology, head and neck surgery, showed that tinnitus patients report perceived efficacy and relief from utilizing cannabis. So for those of you who don't know what tinnitus is, that's the ringing in your ears that folks have frequently, and it showed that over 1 in 5 of the patients studied identified as current cannabis consumers, and 80% of them reported beneficial effects of treating their symptoms with cannabis. So good news there. And then lastly, one coming out of Lakeland, Florida, is a data published in the IATSS, the International Association of Traffic and Safety Science Research, showed that the adoption of state-level legalization laws is associated with reductions in the number of alcohol-related fatalities involving pedestrians. So, what we were talking about today with the city of Tampa and these additional deaths that are happening with the adoption, Polytechnic University is the one who conducted this research. So shout out to the, great folks there. Examining between the years of 1985 and 2019, the correlation of marijuana legalization and the rates of pedestrian involved fatal crashes. Could it be that when you have high quality bud, you're just too stoned to get off the couch and be less likely to be driving on the road? Duh. So, and then last, I just want to run through some state policy updates and let folks know what's happening. In the state of Minnesota, there's some legislation pending in their legislature for adult use. In Georgia, they're currently seeking to pass decriminalization ordinances, in unincorporated parts of certain counties of less than 1 ounce of marijuana, with fines exceeding no more than $1,000. In South Dakota, they have bills to reduce cannabis penalties, which unfortunately seem to have failed in the Senate. In Texas, they've heard bills and are pending to vote on reducing penalties for 1 ounce or less of cannabis flower or concentrates. And so, and then in addition, there's a great bill that's passed through North Carolina, which they're moving through, the North Carolina Compassionate Care Act. The Carolinas still remain one of the few states in the South without any type of medical marijuana. So to see this pushed through there, as well as in South Carolina, the Put Patients First Act, which will prohibit schools, landlords, and employers from discriminating against people registered to engage in the medical use of marijuana, which is something we don't even have in Florida. So, you see these other Southern conservative states stepping up to the plate and doing what the DeSantis administration and the Florida GOP have failed to do. And for those of you who have a problem with me talking about partisan politics, I want to make it clear. Ron DeSantis and the Florida Republican Party run both chambers of the House and Senate with supermajorities. They are so focused right now on making it illegal for drag queens and trans people to exist and give two shits about medical marijuana patients or the fact that the number one cause of death among children are firearms. I'm someone who's a Second Amendment, believer more than most. But I tell you this much: the fact is that kids are not dying at drag shows; they're dying from school shootings, and it's in ridiculous amounts. And the Florida GOP doesn't give two shits as to whether or not you, as a medical patient, or your kids are safe. And so that's just something that I'm going to continue to harp on until we get some change.
Absolutely. Now, I don't. I'm also a believer in Second Amendment rules, although it's as far as the title is concerned, that's not really what the Second Amendment was all about. But I do believe that people have the right to own firearms as long as they're responsible gun owners. I know that your honeymoon, you went to Machine Gun World over in Orlando, so I know that you've been involved in that. But we need just to be aware that when you start to give guns more rights than women and minorities, there's a problem.
I would even go so far as to quote Muhammad Ali. There are dogs in this country that have more rights than women and minorities, and that's a damn shame, but that's where we're at right now.
Take that away now because now Wu-Tang can't put his hand, her head out the window anymore.
Well, and the other thing is, I also, we report on some of these good bills, but there still are bad bills even in good states. For example, right now in the state of Maryland, there's a bill that wants to arbitrarily cap THC levels at 15% for marijuana flower and concentrates. In New York, they're trying to cap THC on flower at 15% and 25% on concentrates. So we still see prohibitionists doing their damnedest to fuck up good systems. And it's just not right.
And we just came from Tallahassee last week. For those of you who didn't get a chance to watch some of the shows we did from there, we did some good work. We educated the almost uneducatable, and we've moved some things forward. But it can't move forward until we have a bipartisan approach to this, because, like Chris said, they are a supermajority over there. We do have a bill that in regards to employee protections, patient protections, reciprocity, expansion of qualifying conditions, the protection of parents' rights, which we discussed earlier, and of course, home grow.
Yes,
But-
and shout out to Senator Victor Torres for his bill, which also allows for home grow. I want to say thank you to Victor. I know he's term limited out, but I'm glad that he stepped up to the plate, and in his final years here to really. He's always been a supporter, but to take the lead on working to make sure we can try and get this discussion happening.
Interesting coincidence there, and now that he's terming out, he gets a chance to do that lame duck empowerment, which I think is I'm all in favor for it, Senator Torres. I love you and your whole family, seriously.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I believe his wife Carmen is going to be running for his seat. So hopefully we can continue the legacy of having good legislators from that family, continue to good policy for us in the Orlando area.
Absolutely, and of course, as good things have to come to an end, I think we have to let this show go for the week. We got some good folks coming up in the next few weeks. We got Congressman Max Frost coming up in about 2 weeks to let us know what's going on with Mr. Frost Goes to Washington, because he's been pretty much, I think, given the fast track towards influence over there. I'm hoping that we can get things done.
Yeah, I was actually in front of the U.S. Supreme Court on Tuesday, protesting, in support of canceling student loan debt. And Maxwell was out there, giving his 2 cents. I was out there with Bernie Sanders, so it was a lot of fun. And he's everywhere. I mean, you see him all over the place here in the D.C. area, making it happen, and also even back home in his district. So I'm glad to see that the youngest member of Congress is also one of the busiest members of Congress. Unfortunately, there are some other members of Congress who have been around here a lot longer with a lot more power, who again are sitting on their hands doing jack shit for us, the people. And so that's why we elect young blood, and that's why we elect folks that want to get things done. That's why it's so important that for those of you listening, if you're a resident and a voter in the city of Tampa, you get out there to the polls today and you go vote at your local library or early voting location. And you make sure that if you can't make it out today, you go out Tuesday between the hours of 7 and 7 and you cast your ballot. We cannot allow disaster caster to continue to run this city into the ground. And even though she may not have an opponent, we need to make sure that we elect a city council that is going to provide for, preventing shitty water being dumped into our drinking supply, that's going to hold police accountable for when they do abuse folks, and that we continue to move forward with a city that's going to have responsible development, and that it's going to have development that benefits everybody, just not certain neighborhoods. And with that, I would say, thank you for joining in the rotation each and every week. Thank you for everyone for supporting us. Go to our Patreon page, go on to suncoastnormal.org and become a member. For $25 a year, your dues go a long way. We are one of the largest chapters in the state of Florida, but we can grow even more. And for those of you who have been members in the past, who dues may have lapsed, come on back. We need you to support. We need you to help us push this over the top. We have some amazing bills here in Florida that we're trying to get passed, but also there are 2 key amendments that we want to get on the ballot for 2024. One, of course, is the adult use amendment, which folks want to see adult use move forward in Florida. But number 2 is our medical home grow amendment, Wise Florida, which is dropped. And so we're looking forward to have Mariah Barnhart from Wise Florida come back on the show and tell us a little bit more about the amendment, about the petition drive, and what you can do here in the upcoming show. But definitely print them out, sign them, send them back, and let's legalize it here in Florida.
And if you become a member of Suncoast Normal for only $25, you not only get a which lets you know you are a card carrying member of Suncoast Marble, but you get one of these power pins. That's right. You get this fantastic gold marijuana leaf pin to put on your jacket or your t-shirt, or if you are into just walking around in the street bikini, put it on that. Absolutely, because it's got a really tiny pin, and you'll always strike up a great conversation in the supermarket. And you
Indeed.
also help us to make these bills happen. We got session coming up. There's work to be done, and we need your help. We want you to be represented.
Yep, indeed. Well, Gary, why don't you go ahead and hit that end button and wrap us up for the day?
Yes, we're going to end stream like going to the bathroom.
See everybody next week.
Where is my mouse?
I'm just gonna give my spirit fingers until it ends.
Where is it? There it is.